Hey everyone, welcome back to D Squared Stories, an audio fiction podcast bringing you short serialized weekly stories. We will be continuing with the next chapter of Wonderful Baking Lodge. Today's baking inspiration comes to us from Becca at Cooking Therapy. You can find more of Becca's work at cooking-therapy.com. Without any further ado, let's get into a quick recap and get started. Last time, I swore I saw Miguel get executed following losing the competition. I was on the verge of being convinced that I imagined it when I was accosted by a rogue audio tech who told me I had not imagined anything and that he had pointed me there on purpose. Under the stress of everything, I almost lost the next challenge before Dylan swooped in to help save me. That night, I attempted to escape the grounds of the lodge before discovering at some point the production team put a tracker on me. They took me back to the lodge and threatened to hurt Leah if I continued acting out like this. The next day, I practiced my baking with Samantha, desperately trying to come up with a way to get people out of here. In the next challenge, a 7-ingredient cap recipe, Peter looked determined to have me kicked out of the competition, and the hosts were about to announce who was leaving. Chapter 3. Rise to the Occasion. And the person who will not be joining us for the next challenge is... I bit my lip, closed my eyes, and said a prayer to a god who I would have some words for about all of this if we ever got to meet. Wyatt. I let out a sigh of relief and let my lip go, dreading the sore I was going to get as it started to heal. Dylan turned to me and gave me a knowing smile. He clearly wanted to take credit for this under his scheme of having us look like we were a blossoming couple. I should really get around to telling him at some point that I have a wife. Everyone gave Wyatt a hug or a handshake. When he came around my way, I hugged him very tightly. He seemed very taken aback by this, and reasonably so. 5 minutes ago, it might have been a toss-up as to whether I knew his name was Wyatt or if I would confuse him with Johnny. I thought about telling him to run, to not follow anyone on the production team. I thought about telling him about the chair. I thought about having a full-blown meltdown right here and now to warn everyone. It was all hopeless, though. The nicest thing I could do for Wyatt right now was just let him live out a few extra minutes unaware of the horrors of this situation. I almost made a light jog towards the area of the lodge where they disconnected our audio equipment. "Get this junk off me," I demanded. At this point, I'm really not sure what I was doing. I was angry and just wanted to lash out at anyone who deserved it. Someone came up behind me, a young woman who started undoing my microphones and wires. "No need to be so rude," she said. I laughed. "Ha, no need to be so rude? Surely you know what you're doing and what you're a part of." "Yeah, I do, Miss Self-Righteous. It's no different than what you're doing day to day. Nice dress. I bet a girl just like you made it. The only difference is you were born to a rich family here and she was born to a poor family there." I turned my face to her and scowled. First thing, I'll have you know I thrifted this. Secondly, being an unwitting participant in a massive system of exploitation is not the same thing as literally executing people, you nihilist. "Keep telling yourself that, darling." I stomped my feet. She was not done with my equipment. The other contestants started to come in and I lowered my voice. "You can stop this. If you just say you won't comply, we can turn this around. Save people. You don't have to be scared of that guy in the mask." She just smirked and chuckled at me. "So innocent and naive," she said. "There's no guy in the mask. Look around you. Everyone you see working here has had a turn wearing that mask, and most of us have had a turn pulling the lever. That's how they get us in. We're all complicit. You wear the mask too. You just have the luxury of being far away from your victims when you do." She just walked away from me. I stormed out of the lodge and into the picnic area, I think once again catching the attention of my fellow bakers. I was fuming. I had walked over in a huff to the picnic tables before they had even started setting out dessert samples from the challenge we just made. There were 2 vats of chili set up for us. One was labeled beef, the other was labeled vegetarian. I was about to scoop a big plastic bowl of the beef when an annoying voice rang in my head, saying something that I had heard just a moment ago. "You wear the mask too. You just have the luxury of being far away from your victims when you do." No way. Get out of my head. Eating meat is not the same as electrocuting people just for the hell of it. My hand wavered at the vat of chili, shaking like it had done the day before when I was trying to make caramel. After some internal turmoil, I grated my teeth and dropped the ladle and had some vegetarian chili instead. I sat down at the picnic table, still visibly enraged. Marcus grabbed some as well and was the first to sit next to me. "On the hot shot, how are you doing? You look annoyed. Things good?" he asked. "I have never been better, Marcus," I thought of saying. "Every time someone gets kicked off this show, they get taken to a back room and meet their end in an electric chair. You're the only person I can tell about this because you're an unshakable wall of a human being with baking skills beyond what professionals could hope to have, and therefore the only one who's guaranteed to make it to the end of this. Instead, I said, I am just really frustrated with myself and my performance in there. I need to do better. I will do better. That a girl, he said. We can always do a little better. You'll rock them next time. Marcus went for the vegetarian option as well. If I asked about this, I'm sure it would lead to a story about how he rescues stray animals on the weekends and has such a firm connection with them that he can no longer bear to eat them. He just seems so perfectly superhuman in every way. Meanwhile, I was sitting here lamenting my ability to do anything about the most truly insane situation imaginable. We were shortly joined by Samantha and Cheyenne, who I refused to even acknowledge. That was another intense one, Samantha said. I don't know if I'm looking forward to the bread one. That one seems intimidating. Especially with Peter, Cheyenne said. He's like the king of bread, after all. So nerve-wracking. I'm sure you'll do great, Cheyenne, I said. Peter has loved everything that you've made so far. Marcus nodded his head, and Samantha smiled. I successfully said it without even the slightest drip of sarcasm in my voice. Cheyenne knew it was a dig, though. She picked at her beef chili with a kind of silent indignation. Not everyone would put on the mask if they were given the opportunity to do so, but she might. We finished up our meals and made our way back into the lodge to get rehooked up. It was starting to cross my mind to ask if it might make more sense just to have us keep everything hooked up throughout lunch. At this point, though, it would not surprise me if every microphone install came with a free calibration of our trackers to make sure they were still working. I hated this. I never used to be this jaded, but this competition was stretching the limits of what I could take. We walked into the room and the cameras started rolling before the judges and hosts entered. But the reasons for this became clear as Tama and Bahama made a comically fast speed walk into the challenge area. All right, it's bread week. No point in standing on ceremony. You know this challenge is set by Peter, Tama said. Peter, do you have any advice for the bakers? Peter and Penelope had hardly entered the room. It's a simple recipe, but because of that, I'm expecting sheer perfection. Perfect, following the memo to be brief, giving no information whatsoever. Now quit dawdling and get out of here. They went out as soon as he gave the command. The others laughed. My mind was in a permanent state of preoccupation. So bakers, Tama said. Peter wants you to make a cinnamon swirl loaf. Oh, I love cinnamon swirl bread, I said out loud without thinking. The cameras all briefly turned on me. I felt myself blush a little. In the chaos of fighting for my life at every single moment, I had momentarily forgotten that this was a baking show. And despite everything, I still love baking. Tama and Bahama continued laying out the parameters for our challenge, and then like that we were off to the races. I worked quickly to make my dough so I could get it to start proving. I was getting everything all mixed in, and I was finally ready to turn the mixer on when I heard a rhythmic thumping of fists into a nearby table. Marcus was kneading his dough by hand with impressive form. He was like a machine working that dough. Oh dang, should I be doing this by hand? I asked. Always better by hand, hotshot, he said. I turned to Samantha. She looked ready to put hers into the mixer as well. But both of us gave in to the baking peer pressure and took it out and kneaded it by hand. I was used to kneading dough by hand. I found it quite fun, actually. However, I was very time conscious, especially in a challenge like this where so much time was going to be lost to doing nothing. Marcus got his done in a short time. Samantha seemed to be struggling a bit and was not quite getting the window pane effect by the time I had gotten it. I put my dough in to prove and then just kicked up my feet. Bahama came by to talk to me. So much time to kill. What do you want to talk about? He asked. The cameras were on us for his banter. I decided to have some fun with it. Love killing time. Favorite thing to kill, actually. What's your favorite holiday? I asked. He seemed to wince slightly. Yeah, Halloween, for sure. Oh, that's a good one. I bet you love to put on a mask and scare people to death. I stared him right in the eyes. For a moment, I could see him searching his mind to find any way that my choice of words could have been a coincidence. He looked back at the camera crew with an agitated expression. Stop rolling. Obviously you can't use this. And who told her about that? What are we, stupid? The cameraman shot him a retaliatory face that conveyed perfectly a desperate plea to be quiet. Bahama turned around to see both Samantha and Dylan, the contestants closest to me in the room, get very perplexed by his sudden outburst. He gritted his teeth and walked off in a huff. What was that about? Dylan asked. I have no idea, I said. I'm just so glad to be here baking with you. He smiled in response. The camera operator suddenly tried to focus on it, but I think he hesitated. Exactly right, big guy. You want to use that footage for the narrative in the show, but it will be pretty tough to splice around Bahama's outburst. I think from that angle you can still even see him storming off into the background. Maybe I still had some fight in me after all. We all one by one got our risen dough out of the drawers. We made our cinnamon sugar mixtures and carefully shaped the dough. Going down to get mine out, I couldn't help but notice Samantha had already started shaping hers. That was not right. She put hers in after mine, and I was playing very close to the edge. I wish I had caught it earlier. I could have said something then, but it was no use at this point. I should focus on myself, though. What was the thing they said on airplanes? Put on your mask before helping others? Ugh, I really hate the word mask now, but I had to follow the airline's advice. Proving Juror Round 2. Dylan was showing me his hacky sack skills. I tried taking a turn to no avail. Should have figured, since I was no good at it as a kid. Marcus said he had never done it before, but seemed to pick it up almost immediately. What a shock! It was hard to hold it against him, though. I'm sure he did not mean to be put on this earth just to excel over me at everything he did. I invited Cheyenne to come play with us, because I was still in my reign of terror. She declined. Samantha also did, but this was because she was looking very stressed out and anxious about her bake. As it came time to take mine out of the drawer, I turned on and preheated the oven. I looked to see Samantha taking her dough out already. Hey, are you sure you don't want to let that prove a little more? I asked. I'm just worried about getting the time, she said. I'm so paranoid about serving raw dough. Before, it might have been a close call. This time around, that dough was hardly risen at all. I scrambled to think about how I could convince her not to put it in so soon. We have plenty of time, though. No one has taken out theirs yet. At least wait until Marcus does. Hot shot is right, he said. Give it time. You're in no rush. Thanks, you guys, but I gotta trust my gut on this one. I bit my lip as she brushed the top of her loaf and put it in the oven. Marcus just shrugged at me. Bless him, he tried his best. I guess we can call us evenly matched when it comes to our ability to keep people from making severe baking mistakes. However, I wonder if he could have been a bit more motivated if he knew her life was on the line. We all not too long after that followed suit and got our cinnamon swirl bread ready to go. Rock, paper, scissors was the pastime of choice for the baking. I secured my 3 out of 5 victory against Marcus by doing a risky but brilliant play of going for scissors twice in the last 2 rounds. Rock, paper, scissors, of course, being a skill-based game that I could now count as one definitive skill I had over him. This skill was all used up, though, when I suffered a terrible third loss to Dylan in Game 4. For brief moments, I was able to put aside the thought that my death was imminent if my bread was raw in the middle. Shoot, 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 Samantha said. I turned from the Tournament of Champions to see what was wrong. She had taken her loaf out of the oven, and it was not looking good. It was brown on the top, and had not nearly risen to the level that a loaf should. Without even touching it, I had a sense for the stodginess from all of my previous failed attempts at my own bread in the past. Maybe it'll be all right, I said, way less reassuring than I meant to be. Samantha looked so displeased, on the verge of tears. Could not, for the life of me, think of any way to salvage it. After a few moments of attempting to console her, others were taking theirs out of the oven. Marcus's would soon set a new cultural touchstone, as all great things would soon be referred to as the best thing since his sliced cinnamon swirl bread. Dylan's looked great, as did Cheyenne's, who would not even need the side action with Peter to get to the next round. I pulled mine out and it looked pretty good. The wild cards then were Johnny and Harold. I looked over towards the 2 quiet men who I had hardly gotten to know. Johnny seemed fine. Harold seemed a bit burnt, but not nearly as much of a mess as Samantha's. I bit my lip a bit again, not sure if there was anything I could do. Was it worth telling her to run now? I languished as a camera team behind me asked her to explain what went wrong. I could imagine that footage playing right before judging. Time is up, bakers, Tama said. Please bring your cinnamon swirl breads up to the judging table. As always, Cheyenne was already halfway up with hers and put it in the second spot from right. That was it! A light bulb clicked on in my head. Samantha, I whispered to her. Yes, honey? What is it? Go up after me. As I walk around the table, pretend to lose your balance and almost drop your bread on Cheyenne's. Then put it in the spot where hers is. I need you to trust me, okay? Sure, darling. Whatever you say. She sounded distraught and defeated, like all of this was just to entertain me. To be fair, she had no idea what I was doing, and could never imagine that it might just work. I walked up, put my bread in the spot 3rd from right. Then I walked towards the right slowly. Samantha brought up hers, and just as I instructed, pretended to lose her footing. Whoa, whoa! I made a show of looking panicked as she wobbled her bread over top of Cheyenne's, threatening to crush it. I made the move to slide Cheyenne's bread out of the way and into the rightmost judging spot. Samantha then gently rested her bread down on the second to rightmost spot. I turned around. As anticipated, Cheyenne was coming up to us fuming. "Hey, put that back. Don't mess with my bread," she said. I stepped forward. "It's okay. Nothing damaged it. Your bread looks great," I said. "That's not what I said. I said to put it back." I stepped forward into her personal space and whispered. "And I said your bread looks great. You're going to be fine. Let her have this." Cheyenne eyed me and then turned to Samantha, who had no care for this confrontation and was already back at her station wiping tears from her eyes. Cheyenne studied her bread carefully, scanning it for defects. Then she looked at some of the others on the table. She gave me a bit of a scowl, but eventually turned her body around. Her head was still right near mine, and I just barely heard her say, "Fine, but you do this again and you're done." I nodded. We both went back to our stations, and within only a few moments, the judges came to evaluate our bakes. They went one by one. For Dylan's, Penelope said, "It's got a wonderful flavor and texture. Maybe could have used just a bit longer in the oven." For Marcus's, Peter said, "This is a celebration of cinnamon swirl bread. Whoever made it, fantastic job." For Johnny's, Penelope said, "It's quite delicious, but the swirl could have been slightly better executed." For Harold's, Peter said, "Definitely too long in the oven. Dried out quite a bit." For mine, Penelope said, "I really can't fault this one. A real triumph." Then it came time to judge Samantha's. Penelope gave the first comments. "It's terribly underproofed and stodgy. This is quite a mess, honestly." Peter seemed to panic. "The flavor is quite good, though, and you can see the swirl was well-shaped." Penelope looked at him with pure confusion. "I think this summer heat is getting to you, but let's move on." They tried the one that was really Cheyenne's. "Now, this one I think is good, but are you going to say it's lacking the kind of mush in the previous one?" "Ha!" Paul laughed. "No, this is excellent. Good swirl and good flavor. Perfectly proved and baked." I shot a glance back at Cheyenne, but she just looked away from me uncaringly. The judges had to huddle for quite some time to judge the bakes. Even to those not privy to the affair, they all seemed to know what the discussion was about. Samantha had her face in her hands as she continued to quietly sob. I wanted to reassure her so badly that the affection of an older man for a woman half his age was going to save her. But that would have made no sense to her. The judges came back and began to rank the bakes. Marcus in first. Holy guacamole, what a surprise. Cheyenne in second. I snatched third. Dylan in fourth. Johnny grabbed fifth. Then they let the tension build as they waited to say who was sixth. I grabbed Samantha's hand reassuringly, but she still could not bring herself to look. And in sixth, it's this one. I squeezed Samantha's hand with excitement, and that was enough to pull her gaze to see that hers was the one, and she would move on to the next round. She seemed underwhelmed by this, and almost shocked in a way that felt negative. Everyone said their goodbyes to Harold. I was a bit nervous as I was the last one to give him a hug. As I hugged him, the strangest memory played in my mind. It was of all things a summer Bible camp that my parents sent me to. We did a reenactment of Jesus' crucifixion and the events leading up to it. I had played the part of Judas, a man who turned Jesus over to the authorities, and per scripture had signaled to them who Jesus was by kissing him. Of course, for the child actors in a religious camp setting, I was told only to hug the actor playing Jesus. As I hugged Harold, I felt a strange connection to my previous role as Judas. This feeling only deepened further as I heard him talk. "Well, at least I get to go back to my wife now," he said. "I'm sure Kayla has missed me dearly." "No, please don't tell me about Kayla and how much she'll miss you. Be a regular old man and make jokes about how you and your spouse hate each other." Harold did not do this, and instead walked off with the production team as I heard them lying about needing him alone to record his farewell confessional. Although, maybe lying is the wrong word. He would record a farewell confessional. The only deception is that he would only think it was a goodbye to the lodge. I stepped out into the audio equipment area, once again as they got to work on me. I was so absent-minded I did not even recognize who was removing my microphone until they spoke. "So, after all that judgment and scorning, you decided to put the mask on yourself anyway," she whispered. I glared at the woman from earlier. "I did no such thing. You shut up." She laughed. "But you did. You went into that situation and decided who would live and who would die. You're more like us than I even thought." I stammered and felt my face go flush as I tried to make up a comeback in my head. She had just about finished up removing all my equipment. "I made a split-second decision to save a friend," I said. "It's not my fault someone else is going to pay for that. That's your doing." "Keep telling yourself that, sweetheart," she said. "And let me know if you ever want to borrow this." My eyes widened as she pulled out the executioner mask from her pocket. She started walking back towards the area of the lodge where I first saw Miguel in that chair. I could hear her stifling a maniacal cackle as she continued down the hallway. My shock turned into pure wrath, and I started to follow her, but a beefy security guard grabbed me by the arm. "That's the wrong way to your cabin," he said. He was careful not to cause a scene as all the contestants didn't even notice his hand on me. I stared at him with all the malice and intimidation that a 5'4" woman of my stature could manage, but his expression was stone. I shook his hand off me and started walking back to my cabin. I was breathing with agitation and stomping my feet all the way up to it. I was ready to open the door and slam it behind me when I heard someone call out to me. "On?" Samantha's voice said. I turned to see her. She had been waiting for me at the bottom of my steps, and I must have stormed right past her in my blinding rage. "Hey, Samantha, I didn't see you there," I said, trying to sound cheery. She looked at me with a kind of disappointment in her eyes. "How did you know I would make it through if I put my bread in Cheyenne's spot?" I felt myself shiver a bit from the question. She was a mom through and through, and I felt like I had just been caught sneaking extra cookies before dinner. I let out a sigh. My mother could always tell when I was lying, and I'm sure Samantha could as well, so there was no use doing that here. "I caught Peter and Cheyenne getting handsy with each other in a closet," I said. "It seems to be a kind of quid pro quo that guarantees her getting by in the competition." Samantha nodded. She had figured this part out already. I could tell due to her complete lack of reaction to hearing this. I then knew that I had to brace myself for the next question. "But why did you interfere? I deserve to go home, honey. Just because Cheyenne is cheating doesn't mean you should stoop that low, especially on my behalf." I could feel myself starting to cry. How could I tell her? She was scolding me for what she thought was just making someone else lose a baking competition for her. How would she react if she knew I sent someone to their death? She would never forgive me. She was too pure for this. I felt the tears start to stream down my face. This seemed to catch her off guard. "I'm so sorry, Samantha," I said, "but I can't tell you that." Her face looked so concerned. I turned away, opened my door, and went in, closing it and locking it behind me. I went into the corner by my bed and curled up into a ball as I cried. I was not a monster. I was not like them. They forced me into an impossible situation, and I let my emotions take over. The world seemed to spin around me rapidly as I eventually fell asleep in the exhaustion of my tears. I woke up with the worst back pain I had in years. I stretched out, doing my best to get rid of it, but it was no use. I had a breakfast bar, eating despite my appetite being gone from distress. I got out my ingredients to practice my next bake, but the motivation was just not there. I stared at them for a really long time, not knowing what to do with them. I heard a knock at my door that sent my spirits through the roof. Samantha had forgiven me and was coming over to bake with me again. I ran and opened the door, and my face dropped a bit to see that it was just Dylan. "Hey, Ann," he said, smiling. "I'm just not in the mood to practice this morning. I want to know if you wanted to throw a disc around." He showed me the frisbee he had been tossing around earlier. Leah had told me before that people serious about frisbee just call it a disc. I looked up at him and smiled a bit. "Yeah, I feel the same way. Let's do it." We walked over to an open patch of field behind the lodge and threw it back and forth. I saw some members of the production team were keeping an eye on us. The panopticon was something I learned about in a philosophy course in college. It was a theoretically perfectly designed prison where all cells could be viewed from a single patrol tower. It was to allow prisoners to be surveilled from a single point at any given moment, without knowing whether they were being watched. What Jeremy Bentham may or may not have known about his design was that the shape of the prison was not what mattered, and it was just the hopelessness it instilled. The lodge, however, knew that the shape did not matter, and it was only the feeling of dread that was needed to keep me in line. "Dylan," I said, "have you ever done something to help someone else that only ended up hurting someone?" Dylan caught my toss and looked surprised at this question. Probably," he said, tossing it back. "I grew up as the oldest sibling, so sometimes when I would mediate disputes, some of them thought I was being unfair or biased." "Did you think they were right? Did you ever feel guilty about it?" "Getting the silent treatment made me feel like I had done something wrong. You have to stick to your guns, though. You can't live your life questioning every decision you make. Sometimes not making a choice is even worse than making the wrong one." We tossed the frisbee back and forth in silence for a bit. I could tell he wanted to ask me why I was asking these questions, but never worked up the nerve for it. I just smiled and thanked him. We played up until around noon, the conversation shifting to regular chatter. We went back to our cabins, reluctantly agreeing we should both do one practice round before tomorrow. I did mine and it turned out pretty good. After eating it as a nice dinner, I went to sleep and got ready for the next day. We all piled in the next morning to get set up in the challenge area. I was grateful my little snarky devil of a tormentor did not seem to be around today as I got equipped. Maybe she found the weight of actually taking someone's life to be heavier than she originally thought. We walked into the kitchen and got ourselves ready. Tama, Bahama, and the 2 judges entered shortly after us. "Alrighty, bakers," Tama said. "This is the last challenge before the quarterfinals, so I hope you're all ready." Today in this challenge set by Penelope, we are celebrating all things pastry with a savory filling of your choice. Without further ado, 3, 2, 1, bake. I started to work on my puff pastry right away. This was going to be another challenge where timing was going to be critical, and I could not leave anything to chance. I peeked behind me to see Samantha. She seemed upset and not as excited as she had been previously. She glanced at me but then quickly looked away. I think she was still upset with me. I got caught off guard doing this as Peter and Penelope came up to me. "So, Anne," Penelope said, "what are you doing for your savory pastry?" "Ah, yes," I said, recovering my composure. "I'm doing a bon pâté so. It's a Vietnamese appetizer, puff pastry filled with pork and mushrooms." "Sounds lovely. Can't wait to try it." She and the camera started to move on to Samantha after, but Peter seemed to accidentally knock my garlic powder to the ground as he followed her. He picked it up and put it back on my table, and then leaned in with a stone-cold expression on his face. "I heard about your little stunt yesterday," he said. "You give me even the slightest chance and I'm sending you home today, you little brat." I was shocked as he continued following Penelope and the cameras around as if he had said nothing at all. My hands trembled again. I was terribly nervous as I started to make my pastry and filling. At some point, Dylan seemed to notice and came over to pat me on the shoulders when the cameras were on him. Bless his heart, but he had no idea how little this sideshow mattered in the face of a stubborn Peter. A Peter lauded for his bread-making and judging skills, who yesterday passed through a stodgy mess of bread just because I had tricked him into thinking it belonged to his mistress. Despite my nerves, this was a meal I had made time and time again, and muscle memory was here to carry me through. Everything was going perfectly well. I got up to the point where it was time to score my pastries before putting them in the oven. That was when it happened. "Ugh, I can't take this anymore," Samantha yelled. "This is all a sham." We all turned towards her in her outburst. The cameras did as well. The production team looked incredibly on edge, each looking towards one another and occasionally at me. They clearly thought I had somehow leaked the info to her. "You're a little scummy suck-up," she said, pointing at Cheyenne. "Girls like you set all women back by selling yourself out to men with power, making them think they can do whatever they want to us." Cheyenne looked offended. She then looked to Peter. "And you're a no-good, filthy dog. You only sent me through because you thought my dish was hers yesterday. You and her conspired to cheat, and Anne took advantage of it to push me through. It should be Harold still in the lodge here, not me. I quit." She stormed off and out of the challenge area. She had almost made it out before a startling, deep, booming voice called out, "You stop right there." Peter stood pointing at her from across the room with an enraged look on his face. Security stepped in the way of the hallway, preventing her from going any further. Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of Wonderful Baking Lodge. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast on the app, give it a like on YouTube, and share with anyone who you think might like it. Once again, thanks to Cooking Therapy for the bon pâté so recipe that served as the inspiration in this episode. You can find more of her recipes at cooking-therapy.com. Wonderful Baking Lodge is a D Squared Stories production. You can stay up to date with Wonderful Baking Lodge and all future D Squared Stories productions by finding us on social media. That'll be D Squared Stories just across any of the big platforms. We also have a Substack. Feel free to follow it if you prefer getting the written version of the stories at the end of each run. I appreciate you listening and hope to have you listen again next week.